I've given you every courtesy, Vivian. This house is no longer yours. You have to leave.
Please take a moment to subscribe. Give this video a thumbs up. It truly helps this channel grow. I appreciate your support. Now let's dive into today's story.
Beatrice Okafor stood on the porch of the house I'd spent the last 11 months nursing my husband inside of. A folder of papers in her hand, 3 moving boxes already stacked behind her feet. "You have until Friday," she said, not bothering with a greeting. Not bothering to ask how I was holding up less than 48 hours after watching her own son take his final breath. "Douglas and I have already spoken to a realtor. This house needs to go on the market quickly, and frankly, Vivian, you were never actually part of this family's estate plans." I looked past her at the moving boxes, then back at her face, composed in a way that took considerably more discipline than she could possibly have understood. "Terrence isn't even buried yet," I said quietly. "And he won't be if we don't get this property situation handled properly," she said. "This was always Okafor land, long before you married into this family. I think it's time you understood that clearly. I want you to understand exactly what I was holding back in that doorway, because it mattered enormously to everything that happened over the following 72 hours. My name, professionally, is not Vivian Marsh, the quiet, unassuming identity Beatrice and her entire family had known me by for 11 years of marriage to her son. My actual name sits on federal court documents, on confirmation records from a Senate hearing 6 years earlier, on rulings that have shaped case law in 3 separate circuits. I am a sitting United States federal judge, a fact I had kept entirely private from Terrence's family for the exact reasons every judicial security briefing I'd ever received had explained in careful, deliberate detail. Before I tell you exactly what I said to Beatrice standing on that porch, because the document I retrieved from my study 40 minutes later left her and her son utterly speechless, let us know in the comments the time and where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because I promise you, what happened at that house over the following week is going to leave you stunned. "I need you to move these boxes off my porch, Beatrice," I said calmly. "This is my house. It has been for the past 4 years, and I'd like you to leave before we discuss anything further." I watched her face shift from cold certainty into genuine confusion, the specific expression of a woman encountering a sentence that made absolutely no sense within the world she'd constructed around me for over a decade. She had no idea, standing on that porch with her moving boxes, exactly whose house she was actually trying to seize, or exactly how completely the next week was about to upend everything her family had assumed about the quiet, unassuming daughter-in-law they'd spent 11 years quietly looking down on. I want to take you back to the beginning, because understanding exactly why I'd kept my career hidden from Terrence's family for 11 years matters enormously to understanding everything that happened on that porch. I met Terrence Okafor at a mutual friend's dinner party 14 years before that porch confrontation, roughly 2 years into my appointment to the federal bench. I want to be honest that our early relationship required navigating a specific complexity most couples never have to consider. Judicial ethics guidelines strongly discourage federal judges from maintaining a highly public personal profile, both for genuine security reasons and to protect the impartiality of the bench from any appearance of outside influence. I explained this to Terrence early in our relationship, and I want to walk you through his response, because it revealed exactly the kind of partner I'd fallen for. "I don't need the world to know what you do," he told me. "I need to know you, and I already do. That's enough for me." I want to explain exactly how we managed this privacy with his family, because it wasn't simple deception for its own sake. Terrence's family knew me professionally as Vivian Marsh, a name I'd used in select public-facing contexts even before meeting him, working, as far as they understood, in what I described vaguely as federal legal administration. Technically true, carefully unspecific, and sufficient to avoid the kind of detailed questioning that might have compromised the actual privacy I needed to maintain for professional security reasons. Terrence's own father had passed years before I met him, and I want to be honest that Beatrice, his mother, had never fully warmed to me even in the earliest years of our relationship, holding what I understood to be a specific, long-standing assumption that I'd married into their family primarily for financial stability. given the modest but respectable position the Okafor family held within their own community. I want to walk you through the years of quiet condescension I absorbed from Beatrice and her son Douglas, because it mattered enormously to understanding exactly how satisfying, and exactly how complicated, that porch confrontation eventually became. Beatrice made frequent, pointed comments over the years about how fortunate I was to have married into the Okafor name, suggesting, more than once, that my own career, whatever it actually was, couldn't possibly compare to the family legacy I'd apparently married for access to. Douglas, Terrence's older brother, treated me with a specific dismissiveness at family gatherings, rarely asking genuine questions about my life or work, instead directing conversation toward his own accomplishments running the family's modest landscaping business. A business, I want to be honest, generated considerably less annual revenue than what I earned in a single month on the federal bench. I want to be honest about why I never corrected these assumptions directly, beyond the genuine professional necessity of maintaining my privacy. I'd made peace over the years with allowing Terrence's family to underestimate me, understanding that my actual identity and worth never depended on their approval or accurate understanding of it. Terrence supported this decision fully, understanding, as I did, that some battles simply weren't worth fighting when genuine happiness didn't actually require his family's validation. I had no idea, maintaining that quiet privacy for over a decade, exactly how thoroughly it would eventually collide with Beatrice and Douglas's assumptions the moment Terrence's illness forced genuine crisis into all of our lives, or exactly how much they were about to learn, all at once, standing on a porch with moving boxes at their feet. I want to walk you through Terrence's illness in detail, because the specific weight of those 11 months mattered enormously to understanding exactly how devastating Beatrice's porch confrontation actually felt, arriving less than 48 hours after his death. Terrence was diagnosed with an aggressive form of lymphoma roughly 14 months before that porch confrontation, a diagnosis that arrived with the specific, devastating suddenness that upends an entire life within the span of a single medical appointment. I want to be honest about the specific weight of navigating that diagnosis while maintaining the professional obligations of a sitting federal judge, adjusting my docket carefully, taking a reduced caseload that still required my full attention even as I began the exhausting work of managing my husband's treatment. I want to walk you through what those 11 months actually looked like day to day, because I think it matters to understanding the genuine exhaustion underlying that porch confrontation. It looked like managing a rotating schedule of chemotherapy appointments alongside a full judicial calendar, learning to draft opinions from hospital waiting rooms, sleeping in uncomfortable recliners beside Terrence's bed during his most difficult treatment weeks. It looked, too, at the specific isolation of managing this alone, largely, given how carefully Terrence and I had always protected our privacy from his family. I made a deliberate choice, throughout his illness, to keep Beatrice and Douglas informed only in general terms, understanding that inviting them more fully into the day-to-day reality of his treatment would have required revealing considerably more about my own professional flexibility and resources than I was prepared to explain. I want to be honest about how minimally involved Beatrice and Douglas actually were during those 11 months, because it mattered considerably to my reaction on that porch. Beatrice visited perhaps 6 times total throughout the entire illness. Each visit brief, each conversation focused more on updates she could share with her own social circle than genuine emotional support for either Terrence or myself. Douglas visited exactly twice, both times citing the demands of his own business as the reason for his limited presence. I want to walk you through a specific conversation I had with Beatrice roughly 2 months before Terrence's death, because it foreshadowed exactly the entitlement that would eventually surface on that porch. "You'll want to think carefully about your own plans. Once this is over," she told me during one of her brief visits. "This house has been in our family for 3 generations. I'm sure Terrence would want it properly cared for by people who actually understand its legacy." I want to be honest that I said nothing in response to that comment at the time, exhausted by caregiving and unwilling to engage in a conversation about property, while my husband lay dying in the next room. I understand now, with painful hindsight, exactly how deliberately Beatrice had already begun planning for this exact moment, months before Terrence had even passed. I want to walk you through Terrence's final weeks, because the specific intimacy of that period mattered enormously to me, and to understanding exactly how raw and unprepared I was for what Beatrice attempted less than 2 days after his death. Terence passed peacefully at home, in the bedroom we'd shared for 11 years, with me holding his hand through his final breath, having spent nearly every night of his final month by his side. I had no idea, sitting with my husband's body in those first devastating hours after his death, exactly how little time Beatrice actually intended to give me before attempting to seize the very house I'd just watched him die inside of, or exactly how thoroughly her assumptions about my own resources were about to collapse. You already witnessed the core of that porch confrontation. The moving boxes, Beatrice's cold announcement, my own calm response revealing this was, in fact, my house. I want to walk you through the full exchange, because every detail mattered enormously to what happened over the following 72 hours. "This is not your house," Beatrice said, her voice carrying a specific, brittle confidence I recognized instantly, having heard versions of this dismissiveness for over a decade. "This property has belonged to the Okafor family for 3 generations. Terence's will specifies that family property reverts to immediate blood relatives. I've already spoken with our family attorney about this." I want to walk you through my response, because it mattered enormously to the specific, devastating clarity of what followed. "Beatrice," I said calmly, "this house has not belonged to the Okafor family estate for the past 4 years. I purchased this property myself, privately, for years ago, when your family's original ownership fell behind on a substantial mortgage default. I hold the deed to this house solely, in my own name." I want to walk you through the specific moment her composure cracked, because it was the first genuine crack I'd witnessed in over a decade of her carefully maintained condescension. "That's not possible," she said. "That's simply not possible, Vivian. Where would you have gotten that kind of money?" Douglas arrived moments later, drawn by his mother's raised voice, carrying his own folder of what I understood, later, to be similarly premature legal paperwork. "What's going on?" he asked, looking between his mother's stricken expression and my own composed one. "Your sister-in-law claims she owns this house," Beatrice said, her voice tight. "She's saying she purchased it 4 years ago." I want to walk you through what I did next, because the specific, deliberate calm of that moment mattered enormously to how thoroughly it dismantled everything Beatrice and Douglas had assumed. I invited them inside, retrieved the deed documentation from my study, along with the original mortgage default notice from 4 years earlier, and the closing paperwork from my own private purchase, and laid each document carefully across the same dining table, where Terence's family had shared countless holiday meals over the years, never once knowing whose actual property they were sitting inside. "Your family fell 3 months behind on the mortgage 4 years ago," I explained, my voice steady despite the exhaustion and grief still sitting heavy in my chest. "Terence didn't want to burden either of you with that information. Understanding how much pride both of you carried around this property's legacy, I purchased the outstanding balance directly, privately, and took over the deed in my own name, allowing Terence's family to continue believing you'd simply managed to keep current on the payments yourselves." I want to walk you through the moment Douglas asked the question that finally forced my actual profession into the open. "How does someone in federal legal administration have that kind of money sitting around?" he asked, a specific edge of suspicion entering his voice. I want to be honest that I made a deliberate decision in that exact moment, understanding that maintaining my privacy no longer served any genuine purpose given everything already unfolding. "I'm a federal judge," I said simply. "I've sat on the federal bench for 16 years. I kept that private from your family for judicial security reasons, the same reasons most sitting federal judges maintain considerable privacy about their personal lives." I had no idea, watching Beatrice and Douglas absorb that revelation in real time, exactly how completely it was about to reshape every assumption they'd carried about me for over a decade, or exactly how much further this confrontation still had to unfold before any genuine resolution became possible. I want to walk you through the specific unraveling that followed that revelation, because Beatrice and Douglas's reaction over the following hour revealed considerably more about their own character than anything that had happened before it. Beatrice sat in stunned silence for a long moment, staring at the documentation spread across the table, before finally speaking again, her voice considerably smaller than the cold confidence she'd carried onto that porch less than an hour earlier. "A federal judge," she repeated, almost to herself. 16 years. Vivian, why didn't you ever tell us? I want to walk you through my response, because it mattered enormously to the honest reckoning that followed. Because for 11 years, this family treated me like someone who'd married into your name for financial security, I said. I let that assumption stand because correcting it never felt worth the professional risk to me. And because honestly, Beatrice, I stopped needing your approval a long time ago. But I think you should understand something clearly now. I could have bought this entire property outright the day Terrence and I got engaged. I chose privacy, not need. I want to walk you through Douglas's reaction, because it revealed a defensiveness Beatrice's genuine shame didn't carry. This still doesn't seem right, he said. This was our family's house before you married into it. Just because you bailed out the mortgage doesn't mean you should get to just take it. Douglas, I said, feeling my patience finally reaching its genuine limit after 11 years of quiet condescension. Your family lost this house to mortgage default 4 years ago. I didn't take anything. I saved a property your own family couldn't afford to keep, and I did it quietly, specifically to protect your mother's pride and your family's standing in your own community. The fact that you're standing here, less than 2 days after your brother's death, attempting to evict his widow from the home she nursed him inside of for 11 months, tells me considerably more about your actual character than anything I've witnessed in over a decade of knowing you. I want to walk you through the specific quality of silence that settled over that dining room following those words, because it carried a weight considerably different from anything that had preceded it. Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, genuine ones this time, understanding, I believe, the full scope of what her assumptions and her timing had actually revealed about her own priorities during her son's death. I'm so sorry, Vivian, she finally said. I let my own grief turn into something ugly, and I directed it at exactly the wrong person. You cared for my son more faithfully than either Douglas or I managed to during his entire illness, and I repaid that with an eviction notice before he was even buried. I want to be honest that Douglas's own accountability arrived considerably more slowly and reluctantly than his mother's. He offered a clipped, brief apology before leaving that afternoon. Though I want to be honest that the full weight of genuine remorse seemed considerably more absent from his response than from Beatrice's. I had no idea, watching both of them leave that afternoon in very different emotional states, exactly how the following months would reshape my relationship with each of them very differently. Nor did I know exactly how much genuine healing, alongside continued distance, still lay ahead for this fractured family. I want to walk you through Terrence's funeral itself, because the specific dynamic within his family had shifted considerably by the time it actually took place, 5 days after that porch confrontation. I want to be honest about the specific effort Beatrice made in the days between that confrontation and the funeral, because it revealed genuine, ongoing accountability rather than a single performed apology. She called me the following morning, offering to help with funeral arrangements in ways that felt, for the first time in over a decade, like genuine partnership rather than the specific, managing condescension I'd grown accustomed to from her. She stood beside me during the funeral itself, and I want to walk you through a specific moment during the reception afterward that revealed how thoroughly her understanding of me had shifted. She introduced me to several of her own longtime friends, not as Terrence's wife, the way she'd always framed me before, but specifically as Judge Vivian Okafor, my son's wife of 11 years, who cared for him more faithfully than any of us deserved. I want to be honest about Douglas's presence at the funeral, because it remained considerably more strained than his mother's genuine effort at repair. He attended, offered condolences that felt sincere in their grief for his brother, if not in any specific acknowledgement of his own behavior on that porch, and left shortly after the reception concluded without any further attempt at the kind of direct conversation his mother had initiated. I want to walk you through how the broader community reacted, because it mattered considerably to understanding the full scope of what that porch confrontation had actually revealed. Word spread, gradually, through Terrence's extended family and their community about my actual profession, and I want to be honest that the reaction was largely one of genuine, if slightly bewildered, respect. Several relatives approaching me during the following weeks with a newfound curiosity about the woman they'd apparently underestimated for over a decade. I want to be honest about my own emotional state during these weeks, because I don't want to suggest the vindication of that porch confrontation somehow eclipsed the genuine, devastating grief of losing my husband. I moved through Terrence's funeral, and the following weeks in a specific fog of loss that no amount of family reckoning could meaningfully soften. Understanding clearly that whatever satisfaction I felt watching Beatrice and Douglas's assumptions collapse mattered considerably less to me than simply missing my husband. I had no idea, moving through those difficult weeks of grief and family reckoning simultaneously, exactly how much my relationship with Beatrice specifically would continue evolving in the months that followed, nor did I know exactly what decision I'd eventually make about the house itself, and what it would come to represent for both of us. I want to walk you through the decision I eventually made about the property itself, because I think it reveals something important about the kind of person I actually am, beneath the specific, satisfying clarity of that porch confrontation. I want to be honest that some part of me, in the immediate aftermath of that confrontation, felt genuinely tempted to sell the property entirely, severing my connection to the Okafor family estate the same way Beatrice had once attempted to sever my connection to it. I sat with that temptation for several weeks, understanding it as a genuine, if ultimately unproductive, response to years of accumulated condescension finally reaching its breaking point. I want to walk you through the conversation with my own therapist, roughly 6 weeks after the funeral, that helped me understand why selling the house wouldn't actually provide the resolution I was searching for. You'd be making a decision rooted in old resentment, she told me, rather than a decision rooted in what you actually want your life to look like going forward. Those aren't always the same thing. I decided, roughly 2 months after Terrence's death, to keep the house, understanding that it represented 11 months of the most intimate, devastating caregiving of my entire life, alongside 11 years of a genuinely happy marriage that deserved to be remembered in the home where we'd actually built it, rather than severed from it out of lingering resentment toward his family. I made a separate decision, alongside keeping the house, to establish a modest scholarship fund in Terrence's name, supporting first-generation law students pursuing public service careers, a gesture that felt, to me, like the most fitting use of my own professional success in his honor, rather than simply retreating into private grief alone. I want to walk you through where my relationship with Beatrice stands now, roughly 10 months after Terrence's death, because it's evolved into something genuinely different from the years of quiet condescension that preceded it. She visits regularly, has become unexpectedly, a genuine source of support during a grief that neither of us fully anticipated navigating together this closely. I want to be honest that rebuilding trust after over a decade of dismissiveness required real, sustained effort on her part. Effort I've watched her genuinely put in rather than simply assuming enough time alone would repair what her assumptions had damaged. I want to be honest about where things stand with Douglas, because I don't want to suggest every relationship in this story resolved as cleanly as my relationship with Beatrice eventually did. Douglas and I remain civil but genuinely distant, his own accountability for that porch confrontation never quite reaching the depth of his mother's. I've made peace with this uncertain distance, understanding that not every fractured relationship requires full repair to still represent honest, meaningful progress. I had no idea, making the decision to keep that house rather than sell it out of resentment, exactly how much peace that choice would eventually bring me. Nor did I know exactly what I wanted to say, looking back now on this entire experience, to anyone else who's ever been quietly underestimated by the people who should have known better. It's been just over a year now since that porch confrontation, and I want to give you an honest, full account of where things actually stand, rather than a tidier resolution than genuine grief and family repair usually offer. I remain on the federal bench, continuing the work that first required the specific privacy Beatrice and Douglas so thoroughly misunderstood for over a decade. I want to be honest that returning to my full caseload following Terrence's death required its own kind of quiet resilience, work that ultimately provided real structure and purpose during a period of genuine, devastating grief. I still live in that house, the same home where I nursed my husband through his final 11 months. The same home Beatrice once attempted to evict me from less than 48 hours after his death. I want to be honest that living there requires holding two genuinely different truths simultaneously. The devastating grief of losing Terrence within those walls, alongside the quiet, hard-won piece of having ultimately protected something that mattered enormously to both of us. If you've ever been quietly underestimated by people who assumed they understood your worth without ever actually taking the time to ask, I want you to hear this clearly. Other people's assumptions about your life, your resources, or your reasons for the choices you've made are rarely the full truth, however confidently those assumptions get delivered. Beatrice and Douglas spent over a decade assuming I'd married into their family for financial security, never once considering that the woman they'd quietly condescended to for years held considerably more genuine power and resource than their entire family combined. Sometimes protecting your privacy means the people around you fill that silence with whatever assumptions serve their own sense of superiority. And sometimes, when the truth finally surfaces, even in the most painful, ill-timed way possible, it becomes the exact reckoning a fractured family desperately needed, whether or not every single relationship within it ultimately gets fully repaired. Beatrice Okafor stood on my porch less than 48 hours after her son's death, certain she was evicting a quiet, unremarkable widow from a house that had never truly belonged to her. She had no idea, standing there with her moving boxes, exactly whose house she was actually trying to seize, or exactly how completely her own assumptions were about to collapse, forcing a reckoning with her own priorities that no amount of family legacy could have possibly prepared her for.
Thanks for tuning in and watching to the end. Drop your comments below.